for a team that seemed like it was dead in the water and almost lifeless a few weeks ago, Jameis has brought new life to them. All right, welcome into the Breer Report for November the 22nd. Week 12 is underway. Thursday Night Football last night, a wildly entertaining game. That's where we're going to start this morning's Breer Report, that Browns-Steelers game, which before we get into the particulars with the teams, I just love watching at least a few of those every year. I'm not saying I want every game to play out that way or every game to be played in that sort of setting, but obviously the aesthetics on TV are incredible. And beyond just that, I just love how hard everything is. Everything is difficult. Everything is complicated. When you put pro athletes in that sort of setting, you see them sort of humanized in a way. And so just getting to see the degree of difficulty in getting things done, and how difficult it was for the Steelers to come back from a 2-score deficit, and how difficult it was for the Browns to answer them after that, and having to convert the 3rd and 7, the sideline throw to Jerry Jeudy near the end of that game. It was just great in every single way. And, again, I'm not saying I want to see every game played that way. Of course I don't. But that sort of setting for football, it just looks beautiful on TV. And having to see pro athletes accomplish things at that degree of difficulty is awesome too. Just loved it all the way around. I hope we get a few more of them over the course of the next couple of months. I wish the Browns wouldn't build a dome. I know why they're doing it, and we're seeing more northern teams go that way. The Bears could wind up in a dome also here in the next 10 years or so. But I really love football and the elements. I love the elements being a factor. I love seeing which teams can survive and thrive in the elements, and all that stuff was on display last night. So A+, plus. Even if it wasn't, again, like the most artistic football game, everything else about it was fantastic. And love to see it. Hopefully we get a couple more of those here through the rest of the regular season, and maybe 1 or 2 in the playoffs. All right. So getting into the game itself, I really have 2 main things I take away from this. Number one, the Steelers are going to be fine. Their defense is still really good. They had some issues protecting, of course, with Myles Garrett having the night that he did, and their offensive line did have some issues blocking the Browns front. I tend to think they're going to be okay. And I don't look at this as any sort of black mark on what they've already accomplished. They came into the game 8-2. They leave it with 3 losses. The schedule is tough down the stretch. We knew that coming in. I still think the Steelers are a really good team. The Browns, I think there are a couple of things you can take from this. And there were a couple of things that I reported on our pregame show on Amazon that, I think we can revisit here. Number one, the plan is to add competition to the quarterback room in 2025. And, while the overwhelming likelihood is that Deshaun Watson's going to be on the roster next year, they do plan on either through the draft or free agency adding another competitive piece. And then number two, barring anything crazy happening, the plan is to have Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski back running the football operation in 2025. I think this game showed elements of why on both counts. Just as far as adding something to the quarterback room, adding competition to the quarterback room, and really the way that they've done it the last couple of years, they put people in that quarterback room to lift Deshaun Watson up. It's part of the reason why Joe Flacco isn't there anymore. Next year, the plan will be to look hard at adding somebody who can compete for the job. Again, whether that's through free agency or through the draft. And I think, some of the reasons why are underscored with the spark that Jameis Winston's given them. Has he been perfect? Absolutely not. But, you saw in that game against the Ravens a few weeks ago, you saw last night that the team really rallies around him. And, he's had a way of making plays when he needs to make plays. Again, it's not perfect. They're 3-8, but for a team that seemed like it was dead in the water and almost lifeless a few weeks ago, Jameis has brought new life to them. And, I don't know if they really had that life when Deshaun Watson was in there. But it does feel to me like guys like Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy have really come alive with Jameis as the quarterback. So I look at this as another reason to again go through with their plan, and the plan right now is to put another competitive piece in that room to fight for the job with Deshaun Watson as he comes back from his Achilles injury. And then the other element of this here is the idea of keeping Barry and Stefanski, which again is the plan for 2025. And I think this was another example of why. Last year, Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year because they made the playoffs with 5 different quarterbacks. They were down to their fourth and fifth tackles. Um, to me, like, this was a night that showed again the resilience of the program they built in Cleveland. It's 2-8. It's cold. It's snowing. It's just really tough conditions to play a football game in all the way around. The Browns are obviously down their starting quarterback with Jameis Winston in there now. They're down 2 left tackles. It's DeJuan Jones, who'd come in and played for their former first-round pick, Jedrick Wills. Jermaine Ifedi's in there. And yet they're able to make plays on offense down the stretch. They're able to, put together a game-winning drive. And they're able to still get a really high level of play out of their best players. Denzel Ward's had a really, really good year despite being nicked up a little bit. And then Myles Garrett was fantastic again last night. And again, they're doing this on a team that's sort of playing out the string now. So I think the effort, the resourcefulness, the resilience you still see from Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski's program is a huge part of what should get them the mulligan going into next year, and why I think they'll get the mulligan going into next year, and why the plan is for right now for ownership to give them the mulligan going into next year. It's a good team. They've got good players. They've got depth. They've got resilience. Yes, the quarterback thing got fouled up. Everyone's got blood in their hands for that. Ownership, general manager, head coach, like everyone's got culpability on the Deshaun Watson thing. But they've done so many other things right. And I'll be interested to see where the whole program goes in 2025 because I still think there's a really good foundation. All right, my second topic for this morning's Breer Report. My most anticipated game of the weekend isn't being played on the weekend. It's being played on Monday night. And that's the third edition of Harbaugh versus Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh still does not have a win over his older brother. John Harbaugh won a Thanksgiving night game between the Ravens and Niners in 2011. And of course, won the much ballyhooed Harbaugh Super Bowl 47. The Ravens won the world championship that night, edging out Jim Harbaugh's Niners. So 12 years later, here we are. We got Harbaugh versus Harbaugh again, and 2 really good teams playing against one another. We know what the Ravens are, what the Ravens have been since John Harbaugh has been there, notwithstanding what happened on Sunday against the Steelers. Is still one of the best teams in the AFC, one of the best teams in the NFL, as it has been so many times over John Harbaugh's 17 years in charge. And now we have Jim Harbaugh coming with the Chargers in his first year and bringing a Chargers team that's playing with identity, that looks like a Jim Harbaugh team, that's right there in the playoff race at 7-4. And I can't wait for this one. I think this is a game where we're going to see the Ravens in position to bounce back and see how Lamar Jackson looks coming off of that loss to the Steelers, how the Ravens defense looks coming off of that loss to the Steelers. We have, of course, the Jim versus John matchup, which, interestingly enough, like, I'm told that Jim hasn't really addressed it with his coaches and players. He always tries to put the focus on the team. I think it's implied in that building. Like, we all know this is a big one for a lot of people here. But Jim's never going to make it about that. It's always going to be about the team for Jim. So hasn't really been a big topic of conversation internally for the Chargers this week. And this is actually a reunion for a lot of people. The general manager of the Chargers, Joe Ortiz, the defensive coordinator of the Chargers, Jesse Minter, the assistant general manager of the Chargers, Chad Alexander, the offensive coordinator of the Chargers, Greg Roman. All those guys are former Ravens guys. And that, to me, is maybe the most interesting piece of the actual X's and O's of this game. In that the defensive systems, like, these offenses have practiced against these defenses, right? Like, these offenses have gone on a day-to-day basis against these defenses. And this is the defensive scheme. Zach Orr running it in Baltimore and Jesse Minter running it there in Los Angeles, that so many teams want to replicate across the NFL. Well, these offenses have had a chance to see it on a day-to-day basis. Jesse Minter, of course, was in Baltimore in 2018, 2019, 2020. He got to practice against Lamar Jackson. So what's he going to have for Lamar Jackson? There's just so many interesting elements to how this game could play out. This also could have an effect on seeding down the line. If the Ravens make the playoffs, but they don't win the division, if Pittsburgh winds up winning that division, and Pittsburgh's in the lead in that division right now, well, then how the seeding shakes out, wildcard seeding shakes out, could be dictated by what happens in this game. So it's an important game, a lot of great storylines. And this is, again, like sort of the style, the styles of play, like these two very similar styles of play converging. And I can remember having a conversation with Jim Harbaugh before that Super Bowl in 2012. It was early 2013, but the 2012 season. And I was asking him about how that distinctive style of play, how it shows up in John's teams and it shows up in Jim's teams. And I remember Jim pausing when I asked him about it. And, I remember his comment was, well, if somebody says that the Niners play like the Ravens, then that would be a really big compliment for everybody in this building. And I still think he thinks that way. And that's implied with, again, that's implied with all the Ravens people he has in his building right now, that the general manager is a Ravens guy, that the offensive coordinator is a Ravens guy, that the defensive coordinator is a Ravens guy, like that all of those guys have seen Baltimore from the inside out and now have a chance to go in and build another version of the Harbaugh family system. It's incredibly fascinating. I think it's going to be a really entertaining game. The only thing that's disappointing to me, you go back to the top of the show on this, is that it's going to be played on artificial turf in a dome. It does feel like Harbaugh versus Harbaugh should be played on a grass field in the Midwest somewhere under a slate gray sky. But I love everything else about it. Can't wait for Monday night. That should be a really good one. Final topic. I feel like this is a topic we've hit over and over and over again over the last couple of months. The New York Jets fired their general manager, Joe Douglas. We did have an edition of the Breer Report on Tuesday, but we taped it before Joe Douglas was fired. So that makes a clean sweep. Just give you guys a little bit of an update on where everything is there. They have had internal discussions about how they're going to approach this going forward. And one thing that's interesting that's come up, I had heard some rumblings that maybe they would hire a search firm. I think Woody Johnson will bring in help. It sounds like they may go the advisor route. And the last time they did this, it had a clean sweep, was 10 years ago in 2015. And they did bring in a couple advisors to work with ownership. It was the ex-Washington general manager, Charlie Casserly, and then ex-Packers GM, Ron Wolf. Those two guys really helped set the table for Woody Johnson's search. I would assume that Woody Johnson will have some level of help, and maybe, one more time, maybe it won't be a search firm. Maybe they'll be bringing in consultants like they did in 2015. So the pluses and minuses of where they're at right now, obviously what they're battling against is perception with the owner. And it's part of the reason why back in 2019, when they hired Joe Douglas in the first place, they had to go to a sixth year with him to give him that security, because it looked like the Jets were a circus at the time. And they're going to be swimming upstream against that again, against all the people that have been there who would tell you that the owner listens to a lot of non-football people making football decisions that can undermine the football people, that the owner listens to what's going on the internet a lot. So those sorts of things, like that's the perception that the Jets will be battling against any general manager or head coach candidate that has viable options or wants to be patient in picking a spot. Doesn't mean they're not going to be able to hire people, but it could affect who they hire. On the flip side, what they've given themselves here is time. And so they have 6 weeks until the end of the regular season. They've already had those internal discussions on how they're going to approach the process. They're on their bye right now, which is giving them some time to talk about it. And, now they can kind of set the course going forward. One thing I have heard is that they could lean towards experienced people in filling these jobs. Again, it's early in the process, but that sounds like the way that they might be leaning. And, I think that there are some names that make some sense. Mike Vrabel would be one. I don't know that Mike would go there. I think Mike is going to be a little selective about where he goes. And he has seen what it looks like when you've got ownership and transition and everything else in Tennessee. And that wound up biting him in the end. So I don't know that this would be the one that he would go and pursue. But, it does he is the type I think that they need. They need somebody who's going to be willing to stand up to upper management, to say no to the owner, that's going to be able to set the culture and reset some things for them. Aaron Glenn is another name that makes some sense. Cliff Kingsbury, those are guys who have a lot of experience. Glenn hasn't been a head coach, but he's been on the ground floor in Detroit. He's defensive coordinator there, and he played in the league, actually played for the Jets and worked under and played under Bill Parcells there. So he's seen that organization when it was in a better spot. Cliff Kingsbury played for the Jets too, believe it or not. He's been a head coach twice, Cardinals and Texas Tech. And he is somebody who they've kicked tires on in the past as well. And if you wanted a quarterbacks guru, clearly he's capable of doing that. He's getting a rookie quarterback off the ground in Washington the same way he did in Arizona. He's done a great job there. I think Cliff would check a lot of boxes for them. Again, so much is going to kind of come down to who they can get, who they're able to get, who's willing to go there. And it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the next 6 weeks with how they're going to approach all of this. Appreciate you guys coming out. Got a good weekend ahead. Then we're into Thanksgiving week. So big couple of weeks coming in the NFL as the playoff picture starts to crystallize. Week 12, of course, now already underway. And we'll be back to recap all of it on Tuesday. We'll see you guys then.